May, dear chosen ones, you didn't imagine it. The person who entered your life with a sweetness you couldn't explain, who mirrored your pain, said all the right things, made you believe this time it would be different. They weren't there by accident. And they didn't come to love you in the way your heart had longed for. They came with an assignment, whether they were conscious of it or not. Not an assignment from love, but from spiritual forces that recognized your light and feared what would happen if it ever fully awakened. So they sent someone who looked like everything you wanted, to break you in ways you wouldn't see coming. It's difficult to accept that the most intimate betrayal of your life wasn't random, and that the collapse you went through was never about romance. It was something ancient, pre-written, designed not to destroy you, but to push you through a doorway you never would have walked through on your own. That kind of pain, the one that leaves you doubting your worth, your intuition, and even your sanity, it's not just emotional, it's spiritual. And when certain souls cross your path, it's not always because you needed love. Sometimes it's because you needed fire. Fire that would burn the illusions down to the ground so the truth in you could finally rise. So if part of you still finds this confusing, if your heart can't accept how someone you loved so deeply could feel, so empty in the end, this message is for you. Not to shame you, but to remind you of who you are beyond the contract you agreed to. We're about to unravel the hidden spiritual blueprint behind this connection and reveal why surviving it means you've already stepped into a new version of yourself. If this resonates with something deep down inside, let me know in the comments by writing, "I break the contract," so that your light returns with strength. Know that this is not just a video, it's a soul retrieval. So take advantage of this moment and leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bells. Some people are assigned to your life not to nurture your soul, but to disturb its balance. Not because you were unworthy of love, but because your soul was carrying a code too powerful to be left untouched. These connections don't start with violence. They start with fascination, a strange pull, a sense that you've known them forever, or that your paths were always meant to cross. And in a way, that's true, because they didn't just find you. Something sent them. Something that needed your light dimmed before you remembered why you came here. It often begins with enchantment, a connection that feels too aligned, too synchronistic to question. You open yourself, maybe for the first time in years, and you start to believe that maybe this is it. Maybe the pain is finally over. But it isn't. What unfolds is a slow corrosion of your trust, your voice, your sense of self. And because you bonded with hope, not truth, you stay longer than your spirit can afford. You keep trying, explaining, forgiving, until you wake up wondering when you stopped recognizing yourself. The pain they caused doesn't scream. It whispers. It hides in confusion, in subtle shifts of energy, in the way they ignore what hurts you while still saying, "I love you." That kind of torment doesn't leave visible scars, but it leaves the soul fractured. And what's worse, you start blaming yourself for the fracture. You begin to believe that if you were more patient, more pleasing, more perfect, maybe then they would finally love you right. But no matter how much you give, it never fills the void. And that's the trap. Because this wasn't about love. It was about weakening your spirit by attacking the foundation of it, your ability to believe in yourself. These people don't always come with hatred in their hearts. Some of them genuinely think they care, but the role they're playing is bigger than them. Their presence in your life isn't accidental, it's archetypal. a role chosen before either of you remembered this world, a contract signed not to make you happy, but to make you awake. There's something uniquely painful about realizing that the ones you trusted the most were never meant to stay, that the person who held your heart wasn't holding it to protect it, they were holding it to test it. These aren't just heartbreaks. They're initiations, moments that burn away the lies you told yourself to survive. And once the illusion collapses, once you see the truth with spiritual eyes, it becomes impossible to go back to sleep. Maybe you've felt like love has betrayed you too many times to ever feel safe again. Maybe a part of you has stopped believing in anything sacred. If so, that's not a weakness, that's a signal. It means the illusion has run its course. It means your soul is no longer willing to play the same story on repeat. You're not broken. You're breaking through. And if you've made it this far in this message, it's because you've already survived the worst of it. You've already faced the darkness that was sent to consume you. And now, it's time to see it for what it really was: a sacred betrayal, a spiritual assignment, a test that your soul passed the moment you chose to stand up again, not as the version they left behind, but as the truth they never saw coming. You may not realize how much of yourself you sacrificed just to keep the illusion alive. You stopped speaking your truth because you didn't want to be too much. You quieted your intuition because every time it screamed, they smiled and told you it was all in your head. You swallowed your instincts in the name of peace, and you betrayed yourself one small compromise at a time. That's the real danger of these connections, not the chaos they bring, but the silence they create inside you. That still, aching silence where your soul used to sing. And when you try to explain it to others, they don't understand, because the pain wasn't always loud. But your spirit remembers every moment it was dismissed, distorted, and disrespected. This is how the light gets dimmed, not in an instant, but in a slow, sacred unraveling. You lose yourself gradually, under the weight of second chances that should have never been offered, under the burden of believing that your love can fix someone who doesn't even see they're broken. It's not just emotional exhaustion, it's spiritual starvation. And the most terrifying part? You begin to believe that this is all you're worth, that this confusion is the cost of connection, that to be loved, you must accept being misunderstood, manipulated, or even made invisible. But deep inside, your soul knows better. That whisper, the one you've tried to quiet, is the part of you they couldn't kill. And still, you stayed. Not because you were weak, but because your love was real. Because you saw something sacred in someone who couldn't see it in themselves. And that is the irony of this spiritual warfare. The purer your heart, the more vulnerable you become to those who carry unhealed shadows. Your presence becomes a mirror, and they can't bear to look. So instead of healing, they project. Instead of growing, they attack. And you, being the light, think it's your job to absorb their pain. But you were never meant to carry what they refused to confront. You were meant to see the pattern and break it. What no one tells you is that these patterns are ancient. They run through lifetimes, through ancestral lines, through energetic codes that repeat until someone dares to interrupt the rhythm. You, whether you like it or not, are that interruption. You were chosen to feel what others have avoided for generations, not because you deserved to suffer, but because you had the strength to survive it. Your spirit agreed to take on the task of dissolving illusions, and that means walking through them first, feeling every layer of betrayal, touching the wound so deeply that it becomes impossible to ignore. And then, doing something different. It's not just that they didn't love you. It's that they couldn't. Not the way you needed. Not the way you deserved. Because to love someone like you, someone with truth in their bones and clarity in their gaze, requires a level of honesty most people aren't ready for. So instead, they loved your potential. They fed off your energy. They got high on the way you made them feel. And when they could no longer control it, they tried to shut it down. Not because you were unworthy, but because you were a mirror they weren't ready to face. And so you begin to unravel the truth. Slowly, painfully, but inevitably. You begin to see that every unanswered question, every moment of confusion, was leading you to clarity. The silence was speaking. The distance was protection. The loss was an invitation. Not to go back, not to seek closure, but to reclaim the parts of you that were buried beneath their approval. You don't need their validation to prove your light. You only needed to remember that your worth was never up for negotiation. And now that you've remembered, everything changes. What they tried to break in you has become the source of your strength. The very thing they targeted. Your sensitivity, your discernment, your devotion is exactly what will carry you into your next level. They weren't sent to love you. They were sent to trigger you. And in doing so, they failed at their true mission. Because instead of destroying your spirit, they revealed it. Now you can see what you're made of. Now you know who you are, without the illusion. And there's no going back to the version of you that didn't know your power. There comes a moment in every soul's journey when the illusion breaks. Not because you finally received closure, but because your spirit no longer needs it. You stop asking why they couldn't love you, and you start asking why you kept needing their love to validate your existence. That shift is everything. It's the beginning of spiritual sovereignty. You stop waiting for the ones who hurt you to heal you, and instead, you begin retrieving every part of yourself that was scattered in the war. Your voice, your light, your sacred anger. And in that sacred retrieval, you begin to realize, maybe this pain wasn't punishment. Maybe it was initiation. The truth is, what hurt you the most wasn't their rejection. It was the belief that their rejection meant something about you, that their inability to see you reflected some deep flaw in your worth. But it never did. It never could, because their blindness was their own burden, not your identity. They weren't rejecting you. They were running from the version of you that refused to shrink, the version that carried power, clarity, and presence, the version that couldn't be controlled. And in that resistance, your soul was refined. When you step back far enough, you begin to see the pattern for what it is. Not a curse, but a mirror. A perfectly crafted sequence designed to show you exactly where you were still seeking permission to exist. Every time you reached for them, instead of yourself, every time you abandoned your intuition to preserve the bond, every time you gave more than you had, it wasn't weakness. It was your soul trying to remember something, trying to reawaken a truth buried beneath lifetimes of silence. A truth that could only be activated by rupture. And now that the rupture has come, the truth can no longer be denied. You are not who you were before they came. You are not who you were during the breaking. You are not even who you were when you first began to heal. You are something else now, something forged in fire, something that understands love, not as fantasy or rescue, but as alignment, reflection, and mutual expansion. You no longer crave intensity. You crave integrity. You no longer chase chemistry. You seek clarity. Because once your soul remembers its frequency, it will no longer tolerate anything that distorts it. This is the turning point, the place where grief becomes wisdom, where loneliness becomes liberation, where the void you once feared becomes sacred space, not empty, but open. And into that open space, a new voice begins to rise. Not the voice of survival, not the voice of guilt, but the voice of remembrance. You start hearing your own truth again, not as a whisper drowned by someone else's needs, but as a steady rhythm. And that rhythm, that pulse, becomes your guide. It's how your light begins to return, not as performance, but as presence. You start to feel your own essence again, not the version of you that performed for love, but the one that simply is. And it feels unfamiliar at first, quiet, unrushed, whole. There is no longer a need to prove, to fix, to explain. You realize you were never too much. You were simply too awake for those still trapped in their own illusions. And maybe they weren't ready for your truth. Maybe they never would be. But that's no longer your burden to carry. Your only responsibility now is to yourself. And that's the real freedom. Not just healing from what happened, but seeing it. Not through the lens of victimhood, but through the eyes of soul contract wisdom. You begin to bless what once broke you, not because it was right, but because it revealed what was real. And what's real can never be destroyed, only buried. You were never broken. You were buried under stories that were never yours. And now, one breath at a time, one truth at a time, you are coming home. The process of returning to yourself after this kind of soul-shattering experience isn't linear, it's layered. Some days, you'll feel invincible, like nothing could ever break you again. And other days, you'll catch yourself missing what was never real, longing for the safety of the illusion simply because it was familiar. That's not regression, that's memory. Your nervous system remembers the patterns you lived in, even when your soul has outgrown them. And that's part of the sacred work now. Teaching your body that peace is no longer dangerous, that silence is no longer punishment, and that love, real love, doesn't come with confusion, distortion, or invisible strings attached to your spirit. As you deepen in this remembrance, you start to realize how much of your life was built around trying to earn something that should have been natural: connection, care, presence. You recognize that you were conditioned to chase love by abandoning yourself, and that every time you did, the universe responded not with the love you craved, but with another mirror. And eventually, the pain became undeniable. Not because they hurt you more, but because you finally stopped numbing yourself to it. You started paying attention. You started feeling again. And that feeling, raw, inconvenient, sometimes overwhelming, is the key. Because you cannot heal what you won't allow yourself to feel. It's through this brutal honesty with yourself that you begin to reclaim your light. Not the version of your light that tried to keep everyone comfortable, but the one that shines, even if it makes others uncomfortable. The part of you that speaks even when your voice shakes. The part that says no, that sets boundaries, that walks away without explanation. That's your divine fire returning. Not the naive light of someone who just wants to be loved, but the sovereign light of someone who now knows they are love. And that kind of light can't be manipulated. It can't be dimmed by guilt or tethered by fear. It simply exists, boldly, freely, unapologetically. With each new truth you accept, another piece of your soul returns to you. The version of you that laughed without permission, the version that dreamed without shame, the version that believed in magic before the world made you question everything. They're not gone. They were buried, covered by roles you were forced to play, masks you wore to survive, and compromises you made to keep others comfortable. But now, you're peeling those layers back, and the soul beneath it all? She's radiant. He's whole. They're sacred, not because they're flawless, but because they've endured the breaking and still chose to love. And here's the miracle you didn't see coming. The ones who tried to kill your light ended up being the reason you found it. Not because they were right. Not because what they did was okay, but because their presence forced you to stop outsourcing your worth. They brought you to your knees. And in that humility, in that silence where you thought you had nothing left, you met yourself, the real you, the one who doesn't need validation to breathe, who doesn't need a role to feel valuable, who doesn't need to be chosen, because you finally chose yourself. And in doing so, you broke the spell. You see now that the entire journey wasn't about love at all. It was about awakening, about remembering who you are beyond the illusion of roles and rescues. Love was just the language the universe used to deliver the lesson. And now, you're fluent in that language. Not the version that romanticizes pain, but the one that recognizes truth. You understand that real love doesn't require you to lose yourself. It invites you to become more of who you are. And anything that demands your silence, your confusion, your self-abandonment is not love. It's a test. And you, beloved soul, have passed. From this place of clarity, everything changes. The way you relate, the way you walk, the way you speak your truth without trembling. You don't rush anymore because your spirit isn't chasing anything. You're not trying to fix others because you've learned how to hold space for yourself. You don't fear loss because you've already faced the kind of emptiness that should have destroyed you, and you came out wiser, softer, and more whole. That's what they didn't expect. That's what they couldn't see coming. You were never just the wounded one. You were the warrior, the initiator, the fire. And now that you've remembered, there's no turning back. You are not who you were before the storm. And that is the greatest victory of all. They came into your life to extract something from you, but in the end, all they did was awaken what had been waiting in silence. Your discernment, your voice, your knowing, the version of you who no longer asks to be seen, but sees herself. The version of you who no longer fears being misunderstood, because truth is no longer something you barter for. You carry it now. You wear it in your posture. You speak it in your presence. You embody it in your silence. And the ones who come next will feel it, not as something you try to prove, but as something they can't help but recognize. You've become a mirror now, too, but not the kind that reflects dysfunction back to those who want to escape it. You are the kind of mirror that invites truth, that humbles ego, that commands presence without saying a word. This is what they feared all along, not your love, not your softness, but your clarity, your unshakable spirit, your ability to see through illusion and still choose grace. That's a rare power, and it cannot be bought, taught, or faked. It can only be earned through fire. And you, beloved, have walked through the kind of fire that most wouldn't survive. So now, your mission changes. No longer is your path about proving your worth to those who never had the capacity to receive you. No longer will your energy be poured into healing people who don't take responsibility for their wounds. You are no longer the container for anyone else's chaos. You are the sanctuary, the altar, the walking embodiment of what it means to transmute pain into wisdom. You bless by existing. You transform by standing still. You inspire not through perfection, but through presence. And that is more than enough. And if you ever find yourself doubting that again, if old thoughts creep in, whispering that maybe it was your fault, maybe you were too much, maybe you deserved the way they treated you, pause, breathe, and remember this: people don't attack what has no power. They don't try to silence what poses no threat. They don't sabotage what they don't fear. What they tried to kill in you was what they couldn't control, and what survived was what they couldn't reach. That's how you know you're sacred. That's how you know you're free. You were never just a victim of a failed relationship. You were the soul brave enough to take on a contract of pain so ancient, so deeply embedded in human patterns, that it had to be faced by someone with divine resilience. That someone was you. And by surviving, by feeling, by remembering, you've already begun to break it. Not just for yourself, but for your lineage, for your future, for the world. Because every time a soul like yours refuses to be dimmed, a new frequency becomes available to the collective. A frequency of clarity, of embodiment, of truth. That is your legacy now. So if this journey spoke to something deep inside you, if you know this wasn't just heartbreak, but spiritual assassination, and yet, somehow, you're still standing, still rising, still remembering, write this in the comments. They failed. My light lives. Let the world see that you're not hiding anymore. Let the enemy know that the mission failed. And let your soul celebrate, not just because you survived, but because now, finally, you know who you are. If you were touched by this message, leave your like button below, subscribe to the channel now, and turn on notifications so you don't miss any of the upcoming videos for God's chosen ones. I would also like to give a special thanks to everyone who supports our channel. If you want to help us continue producing content, you can support us through our Buy Me a Coffee. Just click on the link in the first pinned comment. And before you go, don't forget to watch the video we recommend here on the screen or the playlist, The Secrets of the Chosen Ones. Each video was made with you in mind so that you can continue growing spiritually. Thank you for being with us. May God bless you abundantly.